How will Derrick Brown follow up his record-setting 2023 season? We'll talk about it right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers right now with you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday as we continue into off-season mode. But starting on July 15th, we're back to your team every day, which, of course, is our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Subscribe or follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where beginning on July 26th, I'll be right back here answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions. So either at me or DM me when the time comes. Get those questions in for the weekly Friday mailbag right here on Locked On Panthers. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. We are done talking about the Carolina Panthers offense heading into the 2024 season. Done at least for the next 2 weeks or so, as the focus now shifts to the defensive side of the ball. Ejiro Evero and his entire defensive staff were retained by Dave Canales back in January and here for a second year in a row. Dom Capers, the Panthers' first head coach, still hanging out here as a senior defensive assistant, and a unit that was really just crippled by injuries last year, showed out fairly well considering didn't have J.C. Horn for most of the season, didn't have Shaq Thompson for the majority of the season, had Von Bell, Xavier Woods out at times, and just struggled in other areas. Really a credit to the staff that Ejiro Evero put together, and of course to him, a guy who should be a head coach following his 2024 season, but we'll see whether owners want to hire someone who's not on the offensive side of the ball when the time comes. If that is the case, again, it is Carolina's gain, and really, I think the greater NFL's loss that this man has not got an opportunity. But good for Dave Canales to be in a situation where didn't have to worry about it. He saw his defense last year. Panthers did a pretty good job against Tampa, and now he has him as his friend. So gonna look at the defense over the next couple of weeks as we continue our positional breakdowns here on Locked On Panthers. And today, let's talk about the defensive line, as that was a unit that at times struggled. But there was one guy who was a bad man, and Derrick Brown coming off of his first career Pro Bowl season. And I'm going to say this. He was still only a Pro Bowl alternate that got in. The fact that Derrick Brown was even an alternate was a complete crime, and just shows you sometimes Pro Bowl don't really know what the hell they're talking about. Now, was he an All-Pro last year? No. But he was absolutely one of the best defensive tackles in the NFL and has probably established himself heading into this year as one of the top, period, in the NFL. Not just last year, but moving forward, especially after getting his new contract. But during the 2023 season, Derrick Brown crossed the 100 tackle threshold, having 103 tackles, setting the NFL record for the most tackles by a defensive lineman in a single season. Now, understand, the NFL's only been tracking the stats since 1994, so it's possible in a very run-heavy game, which football used to be, that a defensive lineman at another time in history had over 100 tackles, had more than 103. We don't know, but we do know this. Derrick Brown, as far as since they've been tracking this stat, has the most of any defensive lineman in the history of the National Football League. Looking at his Pro Football Focus numbers last year, a 90.1 overall PFF grade, elite. Fourth out of 130 defensive linemen last year. Run defense, 90.0. Again, elite. Second out of 137. Only Quinnen Williams from the New York Jets was ranked ahead of him. Pass rush. And this is something people say, Derrick Brown, he's really good at stopping the run, solid player, but he doesn't really get after the pass all that much. Doesn't have a lot of sacks, which is true. His pass rush grade, 78.1. 18th out of 109. A lot better than I think you would expect. He does get some solid pressure. PFF credited him with 2 sacks last year, 27 hurries, 12 quarterback hits, and 41 pressures. Think about this. Talk about Ike Ekwonu. Ike Ekwonu gave up 44 total pressures last year, according to PFF, playing the left tackle spot in Carolina. Derrick Brown had 41 pressures in less snaps played. So give that guy a ton of credit. He may not get home all the time, but he certainly is pressuring the quarterback, and he is playing his role and beyond. Having to carry the defensive line last year, and he was rewarded, thankfully, because I was concerned after watching McCaffrey get traded after getting paid, watching DJ Moore get traded after getting paid, and watching Brian Burns get traded as the Panthers didn't want to pay. I didn't want to sit here and watch yet another successful first-round pick here in Carolina not get his money or get his money, then be jettisoned off, which could still be the case with Derrick Brown. But I'm going to think positively, and I think he's going to be someone who sticks around here for the foreseeable future. The Panthers gave him a 4-year, $96 million contract with $63 million in guarantees. Well-deserved, making it the 4th most in total value among defensive tackles, 6th most in average annual value, and only 10th most in guaranteed money, which kind of makes sense in a way, as Brown's not a guy who he does get good pressure numbers, solid pass rushing grade according to PFF, but not a lot of times does he get home, which is not really what the Panthers are asking to do. They're asking some of the guys on the outside to do that, and maybe some other guys on a defensive line alongside Derrick Brown to be able to do that. But he brings a lot to the table. He is a leader here in Carolina. He's done all the things right on the field, off the field, the exact kind of guy you want to pay, and the exact kind of guy you want to have anchoring that side of the line of scrimmage. Panthers were rough at the line of scrimmage last year on both sides of the ball. Derrick Brown, he's a guy who held up. He's a guy who early on in his career, he didn't do all that well. It would have helped to have KK short during that pandemic season. That was not the case, and he's had to be a leader really from the get-go, and he's played really well in the past, but last year played at an elite level, and I'm just so curious to see what he's able to do this upcoming season. I think he's going to be a Pro Bowler once again. I don't think it's going to be an alternate. I think he's going to be a flat-out Pro Bowler, and knowing that Chris Jones and Quinnen Williams and all those guys exist, Aaron Donald no longer in the NFL as he's retired, it's always going to make it difficult to be an All-Pro, especially if you're not playing for a contender. Now, Quinnen Williams was not playing for a contender last year in New York, but Chris Jones is playing for a contender every single season in Kansas City, and he has also been an outstanding player. It will always be difficult to be an All-Pro. There are first and second team, and it would not shock me at all if Derrick Brown is able to put up similar numbers. Maybe you have to pass a little bit more. Todd Wash, the defensive line coach, is here for second season, working at DB. Talked about last year that he really wants to get that element of his game, being a better pass rusher. Who's not to say that after another offseason working with Todd Wash, that Derrick Brown moves that sack total from 2 to 4, 5.5. We'll see how that plays out, but I expect him to play again at a Pro Bowl level, be the best player, because he is the best player here in Carolina, and anchor that defensive line. He's going to need a little bit of help from his friends, because last year, the Panthers were low-key bad at the line of scrimmage defensively when you weren't talking about Derrick Brown. So let's take a look at the rest of the defensive line depth chart when we return here on Locked on Panthers. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. With Carol last-minute deals, all-in prices, views and receipt, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the work out of buying MLB tickets. And I know we got the MLB All-Star Game going on next week, and if you want to wait till last minute, Game Time would be a great place for you to save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. Get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. It's LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So the expectation is that Derrick Brown is going to do what Derrick Brown does, and that's just eat up the middle of the defensive line, sometimes get after the passer with some pressures, and be just an all-around menace and one of the best defensive tackles in the NFL. We've established that that is who he is now and moving forward. And when you get $96 million and $63 million guarantees, yeah, that's the expectation for you moving forward, and well-deserved, Derrick Brown. How about the rest of the Panthers' defensive line? Because let's think about this, guys. Low-key, defensive line, particularly defensive tackle, was a big need for the Panthers this offseason after ranking 31st in defensive run run EPA. They were bad against the run last year. Remember the first 6 games, 6 straight opponents, over 130 yards. You look back at the game against the Packers, the Panthers offense finally did something, and the Panthers defense could not get off the field. And really in that first quarter, Aaron Jones ran all over them. This is a bad run defense. The defense overall was a lot better than what we would have expected with all the injuries, but run stopping, that's a problem. And they got to be a lot better at it this year, which is why A'Shawn Robinson was signed to a 3-year, $22.5 million deal. Following year with the Giants, Robinson reuniting with his defensive coordinator here down in Carolina, Jerry Rivera, spent 3 years with him in LA with the Rams. Last season, his overall PFF grade was a 58.6, 75th, had 130 defensive tackles. Run defense grade was 60.6. That was 49th of 137 qualifying interior defensive lineman. And then pass rush grade was 52.8, 98 out of 109. None of those numbers really jump out to you. Very replacement level, league average kind of numbers there. The run defense grade is what stands out. Being a top 50 defensive tackle last year and knowing that Deshaun Williams, who was in that starter spot, was right there around 130. The Panthers needed to upgrade in a big way by bringing in A'Shawn Robinson, who's known to be someone who can stop the run, can really fill up that space. And he's also a younger player, being 29, where Williams is going to be 31 heading into the season, where he's up in Buffalo, I believe. So A'Shawn Robinson, expectation is from the start, come in, be good against the run, maybe not out there and a lot of pass rushing downs, because that's not really what he does. But he's got to be someone who can really help them stop the run. And having Derrick Brown obviously already here and having a better run stopper should lead to the Panthers being better against the run this upcoming season. Shy Tuttle, also back in Carolina. Last year signed a 3-year, $19.5 million deal, $13 million guaranteed. And the way things are structured, had a signing bonus right at the top, got his full 2023 salary, and he had his 2024 salary also guaranteed, meaning the Panthers didn't really have much recourse this offseason to cut him. And he was a player that really should have been cut had the Panthers had the ability to save some cap space and went out of lost cap space by doing it, as his grades last year were pretty bad, according to PFF. And even watching the game, I just did not see really many moments, if any at all, where Shy Tuttle really stood out and made you think, yeah, that's a guy who was worth the money that you paid him. That's a guy who's a really solid starter for you. That was just not the case last season. Not saying it can't be the case this season, but last year, overall PFF grade 52.9, which was worse than A'Shawn Robinson, 91st of 130 interior defensive linemen. Run defense grade 52.8, 73rd of 137, not good. Pass rush grade 57.8, 85th of 109. You're looking at Robinson, who's signed to a bigger deal than what Tuttle got. Now, Robinson has less guaranteed money than Shy Tuttle, but signed to a bigger deal when it comes to the overall value. He's bringing a little bit more to the table this offseason than what Shy Tuttle brought last offseason. Looking at where he's been graded in his career so far, Shy Tuttle is, according to PFF, he's gone from a 75.9 as a rookie to 73.1 to 71.7 to 60.3 to 52.9. He has regressed, according to PFF, every single year he's played in the NFL. Like, why is that? What is it about whatever he's been running, maybe his health? Why has he regressed? That is something that he needs to figure out, and something that Jerry Rivera and the staff need to figure out as year 2. You're expecting in year 2 for the players to understand the scheme more. You got a guy in Derrick Brown who was great last year, first year in a scheme, expecting him to be great again this year. A'Shawn Robinson's been in the scheme before, so you should understand it should be a fairly seamless transition coming over from the Giants. And then Shy Tuttle, second year. Maybe it's just didn't understand necessarily the concepts, and maybe there's some other issues he also had last year. I don't know. But he's going to be a starter for Carolina, which is the expectation. Once again, considering that his salary is fully guaranteed this year, he has to be better. And the Panthers are not going to be better on the line of scrimmage, on the defense side of the ball, if Shy Tuttle is not going to at least play at a league average level. Because last year, that was not the case at all. Whether it was overall, against the run, rushing as a pass rusher from the interior, he wasn't good. He has to be better this year, and my hope is he will. I can't say my expectation is, because hard to expect that when a player has shown that he gets worse every season. Maybe Scott Bitter should have seen this. Maybe Dan Morgan, who was here last year, should have seen it. Either way, he's here for another year. Jaden Crumedy. The Panthers decided that they needed to add another defensive lineman in the draft. Picking Crumedy out of Mississippi State, 6th round, 200th overall. Looking at stats last year in Stark Vegas. Also, he had played 12 games, 35 tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks. Only 24 years old by training camp. So this is an older prospect. And this is the case with a lot of guys coming out of college as they had the COVID year, decided that everyone needed to have a COVID year. Even a kid who was an incoming freshman who hadn't even been in college before needed to have an extra year to stick around and to be 24 damn years old by the time they leave. But it worked out. He got drafted, and we had talked to Stefan Krajnik of the Clarion Ledger there in Jackson. He covers Mississippi State, and he talked about Crumedy. Had he not gotten injured in 2022, probably would have left last year. So injuries played a role, and it's a good thing that you have the COVID year. That allowed guys like Crumedy to get another opportunity to get drafted and now to come to Carolina, but still 24 years old. There's going to be an expectation that he comes in and he's able to contribute right away, I would think, at that age and being a draft pick. As PFF scouting report, they said pass rush production just isn't there for Crumedy, but his 72.8 run defense grade in 2023 proves that he does have the ability to develop into a rotational player on the defensive line. And that is my expectation this year. A rotational player on a defensive line who can help you out when stopping the run. Shy Tuttle, if he's not great against the run and Crumedy is better, give Crumedy an opportunity. You're paying him for a reason. So give him, or you dropped him for a reason. So give him an opportunity to do that. Either way, you're going to rotate your defensive linemen. They're not going to play every single snap. Now, Derrick Brown may play a lot of snaps, and damn near every one of them. I don't expect Robinson or Tuttle to play every snap, of course. So Crumedy, he'll get an opportunity this season as long as he makes the roster. Nick Thurman played in all 17 games last year. 31 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 1 quarterback hit, played in 35% of defensive snaps that were available to him, 12% of the special team snaps. And he was he was the second best defensive lineman, according to PFF, the Panthers had last year. And even watching the games, he definitely was the second best defensive lineman that they had. 63.4 PFF grade. That was 48th out of 130. Run defense grade, 65.4. That was 31st. Not great when it comes to pass rushing, but that's totally fine. I think back to the Falcons game, really flashed. A lot of games late in the season, Nick Thurman looked like a guy that could help you down the road. And I was wondering if the Panthers were going to want to add anybody on the interior defensive line outside of Robinson, because they had guys like Nick Thurman who had shown some promise the year prior. And I'm excited to see what he's going to do. I think he's going to be guys going to be on the roster again this year. And I think he's going to be a rotational player who could be pushing Shy Tuttle for his job just based off of he played better last year. And money is money. The only reason that Shy Tuttle is probably on the roster this year is because of the financial commitment. But that does not mean in year 2 in this system with the same defensive players, not players, but staff, that they're going to have him be the starter yet again. LeBron Ray played in all 17 games last year, recording only 19 tackles, played in 34% of the defensive snaps. His overall PFF grade, 54.6, 84th of 130. Run defense grade, 59.2, 55th out of 137. Solid, just rotational player. I mean, below replacement level in a way. So my expectation would be, if he makes it, just rotational guy that gives you some snaps. Don't expect the biggest impact. He's a younger guy, so you maybe could project down the road to be someone who can help you out more in that rotation at the defensive line positions. How many D linemen will Carolina keep in 2024? We'll come back to talk about that here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. So, how many defensive linemen will the Carolina Panthers keep in 2024? And here's the nice thing. Looking at the offense, had to look at what Tampa did last year. Had to look at what Seattle did, knowing that Canales was last year in Tampa. Brad Idzik, the OC, was also down there as his right-hand man. And a lot of offensive staffers came over from Seattle once Pete Carroll retired. So had to figure out what they did with their roster. And, of course, it's not going to necessarily be because they did this in Seattle. They did that in Tampa last year. That's how things are going to work out. As Canales is just the OC, and a lot of these guys were just offensive staff members. They weren't the general manager or the head coach who would have the final say when it comes to those roster decisions, but a way to try and figure out how it would work out. Now, same kind of case here in Carolina. Scott Bitter, he's gone. Dan Morgan's now the GM. You also have Brant Tillis here. Dave Canales, the head coach. You have the same defensive coaching staff. And I would imagine if you're going to retain them, you're going to let you know who they think can help them out this season. And I imagine that's kind of how things typically go. You talk to the OC, you talk to the defensive play callers, and ask, all right, who are the guys that can help you? Can they play special teams? Are they blah, blah, blah? So I think that's kind of how it's going to work out again this year. So last year, they kept 5 defensive linemen. I am curious because I'm looking at, and we'll talk about this on Friday. I'm looking at the edge rusher spot, and there was an injury, and I'm wondering how that's going to kind of impact the numbers as far as the initial 53. Understand, initial 53-man roster will happen late August. Then the Panthers have a chance to put in some waiver claims. So guys who make the roster right away may not still be on the roster come Labor Day weekend. And of course, going into week 1 of the NFL season, keep that in mind. But looking at it as far as the initial 53-man roster and thinking about the numbers maybe being a little bit lighter when it comes to the outside linebacker edge rushing spot, guaranteed roster spot, roster bubble, practice squad, the way I've been breaking it down as far as the tiers go. Derrick Brown, obviously, he's on the roster. A'Shawn Robinson, obviously, on the roster. Shy Tuttle, if they would have got rid of him, they would have already done it. Those 3 are on the roster and would be your projected starters. The next 3 I see on the roster bubble. Nick Thurman, I feel pretty confident about him making the roster, so maybe he's not on the roster bubble, but I'm not going to say he's a guaranteed roster spot. It still is a new coaching staff, even if it is the same on the defensive side of the ball, new GM, new head coach. So they're going to have a say in that as well. But I would say Nick Thurman is probably the top guy to be up there as the 4th defensive tackle. Jaden Crumedy, the politics of he got drafted in the 6th round. Now, being drafted in the 6th round does not guarantee that you will make the team. You still have to do the work. I see an opportunity still, though, on the defensive line and the interior for him to be able to make the roster. Then LeBron Ray would be the other one I'm looking at as another guy who's right there on the fringe. So it could be those 3 fighting for 2 spots, or it could be all 3 of those guys just fine because they take 6. I think that Crumedy and Thurman are the 2 of those 3 who are the safest, although I could see Ray making it and the Panthers having 6 defensive linemen this season. Practice squad players, guys, I didn't mention when breaking down the depth chart because these are guys I don't really expect to make an impact. Got Derek McClendon, Ulu Ale, got Popo Amave, and TJ Smith. Hopefully I got those 2 middle names correctly here on the show, but those are going to be guys that are camp bodies. Going to see a lot of them in the preseason, and then I expect that they'll try to sign if Crumedy or Thurman or Ray are guys who all make the roster. If one of them, I guess, of course, doesn't make it, then you would think that they'd be signed to the practice squad. But if not, if you get all 3 of those guys on the roster, then these are the 4 guys I'd look at as being potential practice squad guys in Carolina. And also understand, too, they're going to look at the rest of the rosters out there and guys who get cut and decide after waivers kind of go through who they would like to add to the practice squad. It's going to be a lot of guys that you've already seen before, but there's also going to be a lot of guys that are not here. Because preseason is a tryout for not just the Panthers, but it's for the other 31 teams in the league. And the Panthers looking at all the other 31 teams and some of those players who won't make those rosters and thinking, hey, could this guy help us out? And could he be an impact player for us down the road and really help us during practices throughout the season and maybe be called up and be a contributor on Sunday? So I think 5, possibly 6. Derrick Brown, A'Shawn Robinson, Shy Tuttle, Jaden Crumedy, Nick Thurman, LeBron Ray. Those are the 6 guys, and the top 3 certainly on the roster. I think Thurman's certainly going to be on the roster, but can't guarantee it. But I think it will be. And in Crumedy, then Ray, those 2 guys maybe fighting for the 5th spot or both going to make it with the 6th spot coming up here when the initial 53-man roster is named in late August. All right, it's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe, follow us free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And starting again on the 26th, I'll be back answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions, either at me or DM me to get those questions into me. Not now, but, closer to the 26th. But in the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole as always, and forever keep pounding. And on Friday, we're talking about the edge rushers. Well, the Panthers, worst pass rush in the NFL last year, bounced back with a homecoming with Jadeveon Clowney here. Talk about that on Friday.